Howdy folks, Jambareeqi here. King of the Hill is a cartoon that follows the Hill family, the average American Hank, his prideful wife Peggy, and their quirky son Bobby. Each episode follows their slice of life adventures in their Texan town of Arlen. I love this show so much, to the point where I've ended up marathoning every episode maybe 4 or 5 times. It's one of my major comfort cartoons, because it has this laid-back southern atmosphere, and Hank's everyday life has this mundane charm. However, I won't pretend that King of the Hill doesn't have a dark side. Some episodes can get a bit crazy, because Hank and his hapless loved ones can often get caught up in weird situations, and the Texan locals are quite eccentric. In this video, I'm going to be counting down my picks for the top 5 darkest episodes of the show. King of the Hill stories that are exceptionally bleak compared to the usual shenanigan. Let's begin. Tanking it to the streets. While Bill is busy cutting hair at his job as a military barber, he ends up developing carpal tunnel. At the base's clinic, Bill notices that his medical form is heavily blacked out, which confuses him. So Dale sneaks into the military base, finds Bill's file, and discovers that Bill was the guinea pig in an experiment to turn soldiers into walrus super mutants. This makes Bill so depressed that he starts drinking at work, steals a tank in a drunken daze, and begins driving recklessly around Arlen. Hank, Dale and Boomhauer have to get Bill to drive the tank back to the base before he's caught. I know a lot of fans consider Pretty Dresses to be the darkest Bill story, in which Bill becomes suicidal over his divorce, then starts pretending to be his ex-wife to cope with the pain. Sure, it's a dark episode, particularly when a bunch of close-minded party guests begin to turn hostile on Bill, but I can't say that Bill being deluded and self-destructive is remarkable for a King of the Hill episode. Tanking it to the streets though, this is an episode where Bill's impulsiveness becomes a danger to himself and the public. Who knows how much chaos or trouble Bill could have caused if his friends didn't step in where they did.
This is Hank Hill, block captain. I know it's the war games and I don't want to second guess your tactics, but are you in distress?
Sure, we do later learn that Bill was actually injected with placebo, but I'll admit that the very premise of walrus mutant experiments did creep me out, especially when it's so grotesquely disturbing for the show's universe. Things get even worse once Bill and his friends drop the tank off at base. Suddenly they become targets in the local war games, and we're basically watching civilians trapped in a line of fire. Is it safer for them to stay in the tank, or should they risk running away?
Choosing life! Incoming! Coming back in! It's safer in here, in my armor-plated womb.
Tanking it to the streets is a roller coaster of threat, emotions and danger, with a little creepy conspiracy folklore thrown in for good measure. The Texas Skill Saw Massacre. One morning, Hank accidentally falls through his kitchen floor and discovers that Dale's been digging a tunnel under their street. This causes Hank to resent Dale so much that he pushes Gribble out of the social group. Then, when the Hill residence is red-tagged, Dale reluctantly offers to let the Hills live with his family. But Dale is a nuisance to Hank as a roommate. While Hank is using his new circular skill saw to fix his house, Dale starts pestering him, only for Hank to unintentionally cut Dale's finger off. A judge orders a restraining order between Hank and Dale, plus sends Hank to an anger management course, where he befriends the grumpy Big Jim. Let's be real here. It's pretty shocking seeing Hank severing Dale's finger, not only because this show has very realistic animation, but it's also not a particularly violent cartoon usually. The closest we tend to get is an ass-kicking or a groin punch. But what I think makes this episode even darker is how it deep dives into Hank's long-time temper problem. Sure, we know that Hank didn't injure Dale on purpose. Hank isn't that kind of man. But the anger classes do make us pay more attention to Hank's history of rage. This is made even more eerie by how Big Jim kind of resembles Hank's worst traits, and Jim becomes a bad role model to Hank during his anger management phase.
You shut your god-dang mouth or I'll shove that ditch witch down your throat and dig a tunnel straight through to sunshine.
Things get even grimmer once Big Jim rages so much that he has a heart attack and dies right there on Hank's drive, which makes Hank see the man that he could become.
Hank, that's exactly what you look like when you sleep.
Luckily, Hank does complete his anger management course, but now he's too reluctant to express any angry emotion at all, which makes it impossible for him to save his idiot friends in their tunnel from an oncoming truck, and he has to let his temper go to save their lives, showing that sometimes anger is merited if the situation calls for it.
Get out! Get out! Get out! If you don't get out of that god-dang rat hole now, I'll get my circular saw, come down there, cut off all your fingers and toes. Now move! Move! Move!
In the episode Propane Boom, Superstore Megalomart starts selling propane, which puts Strickland Propane out of business, and Buck has to fire Hank. So Hank sucks it up and starts working for Megalomart's propane department, where he's belittled and bullied as a trainee. While Hank gets ready to hold a protest against Megalomart, Luann breaks up with Megalomart employee Buckley, only for Hank to smell propane, and it turns out that Buckley left a propane tank switched on. Suddenly, the whole superstore blows up in a huge explosion, leaving Hank traumatized and Luann bald. Cut to the episode Death of a Propane Salesman, in which Strickland gets back in business, but Hank has developed an irrational fear of propane, while Luann has become obsessed with Irish famine in a Sinead O'Connor act. This is one of the more somber King of the Hill episodes. Sure, it still has lots of funny bits, but behind all those laughs is a story of trauma and grief. There's something kind of tragic about Hank developing a phobia of the very thing that he loves dearest in his life.
You are acting like you're afraid of propane. Oh my God.
He can barely function now that the slightest hiss of propane triggers him. From avoiding returning to the job he adores doing, to being too frightened to grill steaks. He's like an empty shell of the Hank Hill that we all know. Meanwhile, Luann's Sinead O'Connor shtick is kind of funny, but the more it goes on, the more we connect the dots in realising that this is her way of running away from her grief. She's convinced herself that breaking up with Buckley cancels out any sadness, but that's not how grief works. Buckley was not a good boyfriend, but he was still part of Luann's life, and she has every right to mourn him.
Hey, so for your birthday I wanted to get you those earrings you like, but I'm kinda tapped out, so here's some CDs I don't listen to anymore. Later, Buckley.
Buckley.
Death of a Propane Salesman has its comedy highlights, but it also addresses some macabre themes with a morbid realism, which is why I think it sticks out as one of the darker episodes. In the episode Hanky Panky, Hank's boss Buck is caught cheating on his wife Miss Liz with his employee Debbie. Miss Liz takes Strickland propane away from Buck, makes Debbie's life hell, and promotes Hank to being her boy toy manager. To make matters worse, Debbie, who turns out to have a manager kink, tries to come on to Hank, but he refuses her advances. Hank wants to resolve everything, so he sets up Buck and Miss Liz on a date at Sugarfoot's to help them reconcile. However, Debbie threatens to tell Peggy that she had sexual relations with Hank. Meanwhile, Peggy, who is currently the manager of Sugarfoot's, is shocked to find Debbie's dead body in her restaurant's dumpster. This brings us to the episode High Anxiety, part 2 of this sordid saga. Hank goes to Debbie's flat to talk some sense into her. While he waits, Hank unintentionally smokes from Debbie's roommate's blunt, and suddenly he thinks he's going on a trip. What follows is a murder mystery story in which Hank begins worrying that he murdered Debbie during his weed trip. Of course, that's nonsense, but the naive square Hank is convinced otherwise. On one level, it's funny seeing Hank being so uneducated about weed that he thinks that one puff of Mary Jane made him kill someone. In another way though, it's kind of disturbing that he believes he might have murdered his co-worker in a drugged daze. Hank's stress levels are insanely high because he's stuck in the middle of a love triangle and wanting to hide secrets from his wife out of embarrassment, so it makes sense that his anxiety is tricking his brain into imagining the worst scenario possible.
Alright, this is about what Debbie weighed. Does this seem familiar? Maybe.
It's also creepy how Buck, who wants to protect his wife from allegations, spends the episode trying to frame Hank for the murder. Hank sees Mr. Strickland as a father figure, and has been his loyal assistant manager for decades, so it's quite unsettling that Buck is willing to throw Hank under the bus for homicide charges.
So if you've taken me out here to kill me in retribution, I believe that would be premature.
I know you fooled around with Debbie, old top.
No, not true. I rebuffed.
But you were angry at her.
Yes.
Louder.
Yes, I was angry. Debbie threatened to tell my wife that we had sexual relations.
Okay, Hank. I got all I need.
Heck, Hank actually does end up becoming a major suspect throughout the episode too, and there's a lot of tension to seeing how much Hank will hide from the suspicious sheriff to protect his goody two-shoes reputation.
Mr. Heel? The boy's right. I would never smoke pot.
So who really killed Debbie? Well, you have to go and watch the episode to find out yourself. Before I reveal my number 1 pick, I'd just like to encourage folks to consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the notification bell if already subscribed. Thanks folks. Pygmalion. In this episode, Peggy forces Luann to attend a conference lecture hosted by pork tycoon Trip Larson, voiced by Michael Keaton. Luann ends up meeting Trip in person, and the two begin dating as a couple. A suspicious Peggy tries to step in, but Trip warns her to butt out. Then, after Luann moves in with Trip, red flags begin showing, and it's obvious that this meat merchant has sinister plans. At first, Trip just seems like a creepy pervy old man preying on the young naive Luann, which he is, but he's also brainwashing the poor woman, so much so that Luann begins quoting him like he's a new god.
Aunt Peggy, Trip believes that no one ever solved anything with a run-on sentence.
Trip also knows how to control Luann's loved ones, so that they don't intervene in his manipulation. Not only does Trip butter up Hank with gifts,
how'd you like to watch some football bloopers while I finish my set? You know, they send us advertisers some stuff that, well, you'll see it nowhere else.
I could take a look.
but he also sends intimidating signals to Peggy to back off. Things really start taking a serious turn once Trip begins making decisions on Luann's behalf. He moves her into his home without asking first, shreds her clothes and replaces them with the same outfits, plus roofies her milk so that he can dye her hair in his sleep. It's truly horrifying how much he's taking over her life. Then everything comes together when it's revealed that Trip wants to transform Luann into his company's mascot, who he's always had a crush on. The man has clearly lost his marbles.
Don't you see? We can have it all. We can be the family in the picture. You, him, and me.
What?
Luann, wait!
What follows is a chase into the Larson slaughterhouse, where the crazed Trip suddenly insists that they become a paw product together. Luckily, Luann manages to escape. Trip, however, stays on the track. He's then tasered by the slaughter machine, which quickly brings him to his senses, but it's too late, and he's brutally slaughtered off screen. This might seem like a Treehouse of Horror style story, but it's actually 100% canon to the show. There's really no competition for the most disturbing King of the Hill episode. Pygmalion goes so hard in its horror that you forget that this is supposed to be a sitcom. So those are all my picks. Which are the darkest King of the Hill episodes you've seen? Let everyone know in the comments below, and don't forget to click that like button. I've been Jambareeqi. Cheerio, folks.